Well, it looks like time is running out for America's retailers. Apparently, this month, the number of default letters being sent out to retailers who have not been paying their rent has been soaring. Now, we all know that because of the shutdown things and the total lack of any retail revenue, many of these folks who rent in strip malls and shopping malls and other sorts of places, who have stores that sell clothing or convenience stores even, although I guess those were mostly left open. Restaurants, shoe stores, you get the point. These folks have no money. And so they haven't been paying their rent. But I guess the hope is that, because everyone is in the same boat, the landlords would understand and kind of give these folks a break until things got back to normal. If we could do things, pretty quickly, just shut down for a little bit. He understood that, hey, even if these folks aren't paying their rent, I can't get anybody else in there anyway because nobody's allowed to work. So that was kind of the understanding. Well, that's beginning to change. And it varies by landlord because some are going to be more, I guess, lenient than others when it comes to this stuff. But a lot of them don't have the choice. The problem is when it comes to stuff like this is that, if you look at a business, you have an employer who has an obligation to keep their workers on staff, especially if they took some of these Paycheck Protection Program loans from the government. You can't lay people off. But you also have a legal obligation to pay your rent, whether you lay people off or not. The ordinary thing to do in a time like this would be to lay people off and then preserve cash to keep paying your rent so that you can keep your doors open. But that's not happening. So if you look at it that way, the landlords aren't getting paid. But it's not like the landlords can just, at the same time, quit paying on their mortgages because they, like their tenants, have a contract to pay every month. And so now that the tenants are defaulting on their bargain, the landlords are going to start defaulting on their mortgages. Because just like in every sector of our economy, commercial real estate is completely bogged down by debt. This extreme over-leveraging has made, the slightest disruption, let alone this major disruption of this whole Wu-flu pandemic and the lockdowns, an absolutely catastrophic kind of disruption, it sealed their fate. We knew this was going to come. It was just a matter of, how long it would take for all the paperwork to be filed. And so tenants are starting to receive these letters from their landlord demanding payment. Apparently, there are a lot of folks who haven't paid in up to 3 months. And a lot of, apparently the malls, I saw one statistic in the Zero Hedge article, that malls on average have only received 25% of the rent payments that they that they are contracted to receive. And that doesn't mean like they're 25% of the maximum capacity of the mall. No, a lot of these malls already, as you know, if you're following the great decline in American malls, are running at very limited capacity to begin with. But of the folks who actually are renting out spaces in those malls, only 25% of the revenue is coming in right now. And so let's say that these landlords start, having these people evicted because, they didn't keep up their end of the bargain. They haven't been able to pay. They lock them out. They kick these folks out. What are they going to do? Who's going to rent from them? There are all the retailers right now cannot keep their doors open. So there's nobody expanding. There's nobody looking for new retail space. The only way that anyone, in time will be able to fill all of this retail space again will be at a much lower rent, because you're not going to be able to make as much money from retail if there is, an economic collapse like the one we're going through. And so simply, the commercial space is not, and this retail space is not as valuable as it once was, meaning that the rents must fall. But even if somehow these landlords were able to hold out until prices adjusted and they were able to completely fill all their shopping centers and shopping malls again, when their revenues come in with that new lower rent, they probably, for many of them, are not going to be able to pay their debts. because they borrowed sort of against the old value of these spaces. Just because the value of these spaces has gone down doesn't mean that the bank is going to wipe out their debt and make them whole. These folks are underwater in their mortgages. And that's the same thing that happened back with the housing crisis after 2006, when prices peaked and then they started to go down. If you bought your house in 2004, 2005, 2006, then odds are within a couple of years you owed more on your house than it was worth. And so even if you had money to pay your mortgage, what was the smart financial decision to make? Back then, it was called strategic default. These are folks who could pay, who actually had the money to stay in their homes and chose not to because it did not make financial sense. And the same thing is going to be true of these landlords. Now, it's my opinion that based on what I'm seeing, they're not going to be able to afford to do it anyway. But even if they can afford to preserve all these properties that they have, based on the individual property, of course, how much they owe on each one, it's going to make more sense for them to default. Especially since, time-wise, it's not just a matter of holding out until the lockdown's over and then getting all of your business back if you're a landlord. All of these folks who are going to be evicted or whatever, this is happening everywhere. It's not like it's an isolated incident. It's not like you've just got a few bad tenants who don't want to pay your rent, so you need to get them out and get in good ones. Everyone is unable to pay their rent, and so if everyone's defaulting on their rent, and these businesses are going to go bankrupt. If they get kicked out, they can't sell anything if they don't have their retail space, and if they can't pay their rent, they're not going to have retail space. So these companies are going to go out of business, and so there will be literally no one to rent these spaces for a very long time. What will end up happening is, like I said, the rent's going to have to collapse, and then people will see that as an opportunity to start new businesses and move into those retail spaces. But that takes many, many years. It might not ever happen. People might just, transition to a more, e-commerce based society. Because normally when you have this level of destruction in a society or in an economy, when you prune a bush, to such an extent that you completely butcher it and turn it into a total zombie form of itself. And actually, zombie is the wrong analogy, but that's beside the point. When you do this much damage, sure, it will heal in time, but it's not going to heal in the same way. It's going to scar. And so after all of this, dead weight is shed by our economy, when we get back to a level of output that's comparable to the pre-crisis levels, it's going to be a different kind of output. We're going to have a very different economy. And so in many ways, we're still facing the calm before the storm when it comes to this whole crisis. The economic fallout hasn't really hit yet. It's just starting to. Because of this, Band-Aid solutions or morphine drips like this Paycheck Protection Program to where the government just sort of floats folks and gives them some money to keep their folks on payroll for a little bit. Once that runs out, then everything's going to come apart because we're not going to be able to just, get back to the way things were. Prices in our economy must deflate. Costs are way too high for folks to exist. The cost of living is, far above what folks can afford right now. Back before the Fed in the 19th century and before the Civil War, one of the bright sides of a recession, and despite the fact that they were much shorter back then, but they were more frequent, was that the price of everything fell very much. So if you had any savings at all, you did it very well during a recession because you were able to buy much more with your money. But that doesn't happen so much these days because since the Great Depression, the government has made it its purpose in life for some reason to make sure that prices don't fall. But they can only do that for so long. They can only keep things inflated for such an extended period, and it is my sincerest hope that time has run out. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.